Today's case is one of those stories that literally sounds like it was part of a horror movie. It's a story involving a handful of missing peanuts. These missing peanuts, however, revealed a secret so dark and so scary, it's almost unbelievable. Imagine thinking a prankster, or worse, a ghost, was stealing food from your local church only to find out that the truth was a living nightmare hidden right in front of you. Seriously, this is a story about a missing girl and those missing peanuts, and the absolutely wild way these two things came together to solve one of the scariest crimes Memphis had ever seen. If you're new here, you're going to want to stick around because the way this story unfolds is just unbelievable. Hey everyone, welcome back. And to anyone new watching, hello, my name is Zara, and on this channel we dive into true crime cases. So if that sounds like your kind of thing, please join the fam and hit that subscribe button. Give this video a like and share it around if you can. Taking 2 seconds to do that really helps the channel out, and it honestly means so much to me. So to everyone that just did it, thank you so much. Also, if you want to get to know each other a little bit more, consider becoming a channel member. You get instant access to our private Discord server and we can chat one-on-one about anything and everything. You can just hit the join button below this video to get in. Okay, now let's get into this deeply disturbing but really fascinating case. So we are heading to the year 1981 in the city of Memphis, Tennessee. At the time, Memphis was entering this new decade and it was a city of real contrast. You had the soulful vibe of Beale Street, which even today is still known for its live music, restaurants and shops, and is still considered to be the heart of Memphis. But then you had the quiet, perfect lawns of the eastern suburbs. In those neighborhoods, families lived behind this pretty secure curtain. Kids went to respected schools, people ran their businesses, and lived in these beautiful, comfy homes. This was a place where the scary stuff you saw in the news felt just like that, something you saw on TV. It wasn't their reality. People often left their doors unlocked because everyone knew their neighbors. And this is where Leslie Marie Gattas lived. She was 15 years old, a pretty popular brunette who went to St. Agnes Academy, which is a really nice private all-girls school in the city. She was a cheerleader, a great student, well-liked, had many friends, and was known for her outgoing and bubbly personality. She loved talking on the phone, going out with her friends, her boyfriend, and was living a normal teenage life. On the surface, her life looked perfect. Leslie's parents were George and Lelia Gatis, and their family was what you'd call old money in Memphis. The Gatis name was a pretty big deal. Her uncle Fred had founded this huge catalog business called the Fred P. Gatis Company, so everyone knew who they were. They were an integral part of the community, and Leslie had this big, loving family with an older sister, Lee, and two brothers, George Jr. and Tony. Everyone who knew her said she was just a great kid. She had good grades, lots of friends, and a really happy home life. East Memphis in the early 80s was the place to be if you had money and wanted to feel safe. Crime had been going up all through the 70s, and a lot of wealthy families moved out of the city center to these big neighborhoods in the burbs to get away from it all. They were trying to build a bubble, a place where they didn't have to worry about the crime and problems of the inner city until that bubble popped. So the night of November 18th, 1981 started off like any other night for the Gatis family. Leslie hung out with her friends. I believe she had them over at her house for a prayer night, and then after the prayer meeting, her friends went home, and then Leslie went to bed in her room upstairs. The rest of the family eventually went to bed, and then the whole house was quiet. At 2:30 a.m., however, that quiet was broken. A bad guy was casing the house, and he managed to slip into the house through an unlocked window in the laundry room. And this wasn't a quick job. This guy was very patient and brazen and creepy. He stayed downstairs in their home for an entire hour, just moving silently through the house while everyone else was asleep upstairs. Eventually, he went upstairs. He went into Leslie's room first because it was the only one with the door left open. He walked in, and just like that, Leslie's life turned into a horror movie. He slapped his hand over her mouth, showed her a knife, and told her not to scream. He then asked this really weird question. He said, "Are you a boy or are you a girl?" Once she told him she was a girl, he started tying her up with duct tape, taping her wrists to her ankles until she couldn't move. And isn't that such a weird question to ask? It makes you think that this was a crime of opportunity because wouldn't he already know his target's gender? Anyway, this guy, he was a big guy, like 250 pounds or 113 kilos, and he actually had trouble carrying Leslie. He had to stop twice on the stairs just to catch his breath. While he was downstairs, he already found the keys to her dad's Cadillac on a desk, so he took Leslie out to her dad's Cadillac, put her inside, and then just drove off. But here's the craziest part, as if this story isn't already crazy enough. After he took her to wherever he was hiding her, he did something that makes no sense for a kidnapper. He drove the family's Cadillac all the way back to their house, parked it, walked right back inside, and put the keys on the desk exactly where he found them. Then he slipped out of the house and walked back to where he hid Leslie and just disappeared. Just think about how weird that is. A normal criminal wants to get in and out as fast as possible. They don't hang around for an hour, and they definitely don't risk getting caught by returning a stolen car. But this guy had a reason. By bringing the car back and the keys back and putting it back exactly where he found it, and since he got in through an unlocked window, he made it look like Leslie might have just run away. He didn't leave any obvious evidence behind, no signs of a struggle, and her family continued sleeping quietly upstairs with no clue that Leslie had been taken. It was a calculated move to throw the cops off the trail. That plus the weird question about her gender made it pretty clear that this wasn't about money. This was about some twisted fantasy, and it was the first sign that this case was going to be seriously weird. The next morning, George and Lelia woke up, no idea anything was wrong, and Lelia goes into Leslie's room to wake her daughter up, but she was gone. So they looked around the house. Okay, she wasn't there. Maybe she went to school early with a friend, so they called around, but no one had seen or heard from her. And that's when the panic set in, and that's when the police were called. When the police showed up, they were just as confused. There was no forced entry, no footprints, and no ransom note. At first glance, it really did look like Leslie could have just run away. But her family and friends were like, no way. She was a happy kid from a great home. She had zero reason to just run away. Now, because this was a well-known family, one of the oldest in Memphis, her uncle was a multimillionaire and she was this young white girl. The FBI got involved immediately and they treated this as a kidnapping case rather than a runaway case. The FBI agent on the case was Ben Hale, and he decided to trust the family's gut feeling instead of the weird non-evidence. He knew something was very wrong and didn't waste time treating it like a runaway case. So the police and the FBI launched a massive search, talking to all of Leslie's friends, teachers, anyone who knew her, just looking for a lead, some type of clue as to where she could be. Leslie's disappearance blew up. It was all over the news, not just in Memphis, but across the entire country. Because her family was so well known, the media started calling it the Memphis version of the Lindbergh baby kidnapping. Her father, George, went on the news pleading for his daughter's safe return, even offering $25,000 for any information. Hundreds of volunteers joined search parties combing through parks, through wooded areas, and abandoned buildings across the city, but there was no sign of Leslie. Her face was on every news channel and in every newspaper, but days turned into a week and then 2 weeks with absolutely no leads, no ransom call, no witnesses, no clues. It's as if Leslie just vanished into thin air. But this whole case kind of turned into a circus. Some 14-year-old kid got arrested for sending a fake ransom note demanding $100,000, which is just so cruel. And then the psychics started coming out of the woodworks, calling in with visions that sent the police on wild goose chases, looking in creeks and digging up parks for a body that just was not there. For 119 days, there was nothing, just silence. The Gatis family and all of Memphis just had to wait and wonder where she was or if she was even alive, which, if you can even imagine, would have just been torture for the Gatis family. And sometimes not knowing can be worse. But while all of Memphis was obsessed with searching for Leslie, something else was going on just a few miles away at the Christ United Methodist Church on Poplar Avenue. It was this big, busy church with a private day school, a kitchen that served meals, and an office for its many, many staff members. So the headmaster of the school was a guy named Dr. Sam Drash. He was a super respected educator who had been running the school since 1974. He was a guy who really loved his job and the kids. And Sam apparently really loved peanuts. He kept a jar of them on his desk at all times. So one day he goes to get some peanuts and the jar is surprisingly empty. So he's annoyed. He's like, okay, maybe I ate them all and I don't remember. So he goes down to the church kitchen to get more peanuts from their big supply jar. And then when he goes there, that big one is empty too. So he's like, what the hell? Now he's pissed, right? He's like, who could have possibly eaten all these peanuts? But he kind of just like gets over it. But it was about to get weirder. The kitchen staff then started noticing that tons of food was going missing all the time. And we're not talking about, a few missing cookies or biscuits. It started off with milk and soft drinks going missing. And then they noticed whole hams, turkeys, shrimp, big cans of coffee, and cases of soda just vanishing. Like a 15-pound ham, which is 7 kilos, a 7-kilo ham just went missing. At first, everyone thought it was just teenagers pulling, maybe a prank. The church maintenance guy, Milton, changed the locks on the fridge, but the food kept disappearing. So he changed the locks again and again, but the food in the fridge still kept going missing. This phantom thief was pretty bold. He'd just take the entire fridge door off his hinges, grab whatever he wanted, and then put the door right back on. The church chef would come in and find his supplies raided and his stuff moved all around the place. Like he would specifically put his apron on this one hook, and then when he would come back, it would be moved, and then his work shoes would be neatly kept on one side of the kitchen, and in the morning, one of the shoes would just randomly be on another table. It was someone deliberately messing with his things. And at the time, it just seemed like this really, really naughty kid playing pranks, but this thief seemed to be getting more determined and more hungry. So the missing food was one thing. But then something way more disturbing started happening. Church workers began finding these little handwritten notes left in the weirdest places, tucked into Bibles, stuffed under pew cushions, hidden in staff desks, even inside a pair of shoes inside a closet. But these prank notes said the same thing every time. And again, it was another cruel joke. It said Leslie Gattas, it said her dad's name, George Gatis, and a simple urgent message, call the police. Some notes were dated, some weren't, some were written in cursive writing, and then some were printed. A third grade teacher at the day school found one note folded up on her desk, and she looked at it and asked around the office and then dismissed it as a prank, so she threw it away. The whole city of Memphis was overwhelmed with news about Leslie's kidnapping, so when the church staff found these notes, they just assumed it was another sick joke. They figured it was some local kids making fun of this horrible tragedy, and they just kept throwing the notes away. But what made it even worse was that the church was dealing with its own recent tragedy. Their senior minister, Dr. Harold Beatty, had just been murdered by his wife Stella in a murder-suicide. So the church staff were really hesitant to call the cops over what looked like some minor theft of food and pranks. They just didn't want to bring any more police attention and trauma to their church community. But on March 3rd, 1982, Sam, the headmaster with the missing peanuts, found one of these notes on his own desk. Then his secretary found another one. So it said, please help me. My name is Leslie Gattas. Call the police and my father, George A. Gatis. I am in the attic with the man who kidnapped me. This is no joke. Show the police this note. They will understand. I put this note on your desk when he wasn't looking. Please, whoever you are, don't leave me here. He might be armed. Now, Sam couldn't ignore these notes and the missing food anymore. So Sam called the Memphis police and told them about the notes and all of this missing food. The police came out and searched the church's 3 attics and the basements, but they didn't find anything. They even asked about this little crawl space in the sanctuary, and a maintenance guy told them he'd just been in there to fix a pipe and he hadn't seen anything. But Sam was still super sus. So now bags of pecans were going missing. So Sam decided to stay back after work one day to see if he could catch this thief. So he counted the bags of pecans and hid under his desk, just waiting and listening. By 10 p.m., there was no movement and he decided to go home. The next morning at 8 a.m., Sam returned to the office and found 4 bags of pecans missing. So he realized that someone would have had to have been there or stolen them between 10 p.m. and 8 a.m. Even after the police search came up empty, the weird stuff at the church didn't stop. More notes started showing up. On March 15th, Sam, who was honestly fed up with this nonsense at this point, called the police again to report 3 more notes. Something was just definitely not right. And one of these notes had pretty much the same wording as the previous ones, but it now mentioned a timing. It said, Please help me. My name is Leslie. Call the police. We come down at 10:30 or 11 p.m. The following Sunday, 21st March 1982, Sam and his family arrived at church for their weekly sermon. Sam's son was sitting in the front row, and when he opened up his Bible, a piece of paper fell to the ground. It was another note. So he gave it to his dad. This note was again a little different. It had one new crucial detail. It now mentioned specifically the church attic. So after the sermon, Sam goes up to the church attic and looks around for 15 minutes. But again, he sees and finds nothing. But he knew something was wrong. He knew God was trying to tell him something. That night, he grabbed his son's baseball bat and went to his office and waited in the dark. Now, his son was really upset and didn't even want Sam to go. And Sam too admitted that, he was pretty freaked out. But as he waited in silence underneath his desk, the phone rang and he nearly jumped out of his skin, but it was his son on the other line, begging him to come home. By 11:30 p.m., Sam was just so spooked, he just ended up going home. But now finally, the missing food, the notes, and now being given a specific location, the church's maintenance men, Milton Bennett and Thomas Mungin, were suddenly 100% sure something was going on inside their church, and it wasn't good. They decided they couldn't wait for the police. They were going to handle this themselves. And I'm not sure if Sam actually joined them. Some sources say, he did, but then some mentioned it was just Milton and Thomas. So on the night of March 17th, 1982, Milton and Thomas set up a stakeout inside the church. They hid in the dark, ready to wait all night if they had to. They were going to catch the food thief and hopefully find out what the hell was going on with all those notes. So hours went by and nothing. Then at around 11:30 p.m., they heard it, a noise. They saw two people, a big man and a young girl, coming down the stairs. Thomas jumped out and yelled, "Hold it!" And right there in that moment, the mystery that had been haunting this Memphis church for months was finally about to be exposed. The second Thomas yelled, the man grabbed the girl and tried to make a run for it. But this girl wasn't just a victim anymore. She was a survivor. In that split second, she pretended her ankle broke and she just collapsed, becoming dead weight. It was just enough to break the guy's grip for a second. Right then, Milton showed up with a billy club. It basically looks like a baton. And he went after the big guy and this huge fight broke out. The man was incredibly strong and almost got the club away from Milton. And while they were fighting, the girl took her chance and tried to run. But the man, desperate not to lose his victim, grabbed her by the hair, trying to drag her out of there. But Milton managed to land a solid hit with the billy club right at the base of the guy's neck, and it was enough. The man's grip loosened, the girl broke free and just ran. The man, realizing he'd lost, just ran off into the darkness and got away. But the maintenance men had done it. They had saved her. And when the police arrived, everyone finally knew this unbelievable truth. The girl who had been living in the attic, leaving all of those notes, was Leslie Marie Gattas. After 119 days, 4 months of pure terror, she was finally free. The police called the Gatis house, and Leslie's older sister Lee answered the phone, probably thinking it was the worst news imaginable. She said, "I'm the oldest, and if you're calling to tell my father that Leslie is in a morgue, just forget it." But it was a miracle. Leslie was alive and safe. Her dad, George, and of course the rest of her family was just overwhelmed with joy. He later told reporters that she's home, she's safe, and she's well. Our household is elated, and we're just thankful to God. While Leslie was being held captive by this man for 4 months, let me remind you again, the fear she would have just felt at just 15 years old is something none of us should ever have to go through. But despite her fear, she did whatever she could to signal for help in any way she could. She relied on her own instincts to keep her alive. During the day, the man would keep Leslie up in the attic and she had to stay silent and do what he said. He would keep wooden boards against the door to prevent her from escaping while they slept. At night, however, is when the man believed they were safe from the public, so he would sneak Leslie downstairs and they would just raid the kitchen. I believe he also didn't keep her confined to the kitchen because at times she would go to the front pew of the church and pray. And when the man saw her do this, he actually laughed and told her, your God ain't so good. He can't help you, and the only one who can help you is me. Leslie knew that despite the long amount of time he kept her with him, despite him technically not harming her, she knew her time was running out. Eventually, he was going to kill her. She could just feel it. So she did everything she could. When he would let Leslie use the bathroom, she would sneak a pencil in her pants and write these notes on paper towels. When he wasn't looking, she would just drop these notes everywhere, on desks, stuff them in Bibles, under pews, inside books, in shoes, in closets, just anywhere she could manage to throw one, hoping someone would save her from that freaking attic. One time, a church member actually saw Leslie and the man in the church at night, but somehow he never reported this to the police. One time, the man went to another room to watch TV and Leslie tried to call the police, but the phone was one of those push button type of phones, old school phones, and it took way too long to dial, so she had to hang up because he walked in. So she decided to start eating in excess, like eating Sam's peanuts, eating too many peanuts, so it was obvious that someone was stealing from them. She lost 35 pounds from the stress despite her eating tons of food. She started moving the chef's things around, hoping he would notice, but one day she saw a note from the chef that said, "Please stop stealing our coffee." So can you imagine? This poor girl is doing everything she can to draw attention to her being trapped in the attic, going so far as to leave notes with her full name and location, and it still took months for her to be found. It's crazy. Honestly, she was so brave, so smart, and somehow kept her spirits up in such a horrible situation. So Leslie was now safe, but the guy who took her was gone. Now that she could talk to the police, she gave them the one thing they'd been missing for 4 months: his name. She picked him out of a police mugshot, and his name was Ernest Earl Stubblefield. He was a 41-year-old drifter who used to work in construction and already had a record. The reason the cops had his picture was because he'd been charged with breaking into another church a few years earlier in 1979. He had kidnapped Leslie and taken her to the church attic, and they hid together inside this crawl space above the entrance hall that measured 14 by 15 feet. So I think it was essentially like 4 by 4 meters, but it was only 3 feet, so nearly 1 meter high, and it was disguised by a false wall. He kept her there for 4 months. When the police finally got to search the tiny, disgusting attic crawl space where he'd kept Leslie, they found some seriously disturbing stuff. The place was filled with his things, a lot of it stolen from other churches he'd burglarized. They found an upper plate of false teeth. They found chainsaws, pans, flashlights, candle holders, silverware, watches, rings, radios, citizens' band radios, and directories to over 40 churches. But the most terrifying thing they found was a bunch of notebooks. Inside, Ernest had created a predator's database. He had written down the names and addresses, and sometimes he even drew maps to the houses and listed the father's jobs for about, are you ready, 4,000 white girls between the ages of 13 and 15 years old. They also found high school yearbooks where he'd circled pictures of girls, including Leslie's. So now I'm like, hold on. When he went into Leslie's bedroom and he's like, "Are you a boy or a girl?" I initially thought it was just like a random crime of opportunity, but he clearly knew who his victim was. But because she had other sisters and, brothers, he wanted to make sure that he was getting the right person. And this changed everything. Ernest wasn't just some random creep who did one weird thing. He was an organized, obsessive predator who was actively building a list of potential victims. The kidnapping itself was clumsy in some ways. Getting caught over stolen food is not exactly genius level stuff, but the notebooks were terrifyingly detailed. It showed, that his real motivation was this fantasy of control. For him, the work was the stalking and the cataloging. Leslie's kidnapping wasn't a one-off thing. It was him finally acting on this horrifying project. Rescuing her didn't just save one girl, it almost certainly saved thousands of others whose names were in that book. So the entire time he held Leslie captive, he never technically hurt her, at least in a serious way. His temper did scare her, but he kind of just kept her by his side. He had apparently written a letter seeking $25,000 as a ransom for the kidnapping, but he never actually sent the letter. They just found it with all of his stuff. And the big question was why? He never asked for that ransom, so it wasn't about money. The best theory came from his ex-wife, Ann Bates Clark. She told reporters she thought he kidnapped Leslie to be a replacement for his own teenage daughter, Patty. They had a horrible 5-year marriage where Anne says he was caught between the devil and the Lord. Apparently, Ernest was obsessed with his daughter. Right before he took Leslie, him and Patty had a huge fight and she refused to go live with him. Leslie was 15, so just 2 years younger than Patty, who was 17. And his ex-wife figured out that, he just snatched another girl to fill that void. She also said that he had tried to take Patty a few days before he kidnapped Leslie. He tried to take her to Chicago, but then eventually let her go back home to Alabama. Anne said she always feared he would take Patty away, but he got a dark-haired girl and ours is a beautiful blonde. That statement was a bit odd to me, but anyway. So for almost 3 weeks after Leslie escaped, Ernest was on the run. There was this huge manhunt for him, and finally on April 6, 1982, the police got a break. A canine officer named Smokey tracked his scent to another church, the Union Avenue Church of Christ. The dog went right up to the solid wall and then just started chewing at it like crazy. The officer knew the dog was onto something, so he smashed the wall in, and there, hiding in another tiny crawl dark space under the stage, was Ernest, but he was completely naked. He tried to get away, but the dog got him and he was eventually arrested. While in custody, Ernest stayed silent. He wouldn't talk to the police, the media, or even his own family. He just said, "Silence is my weapon." He was charged with aggravated kidnapping and first-degree burglary. So at first he pled not guilty, and then surprisingly he went against his own lawyer's advice and then pleaded guilty in 1982. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Over the years he had a few parole hearings, but he was always denied. And at his 1997 hearing, one of the board members, Larry Hassel, said he discovered something really gross about Ernest. He said he showed no remorse and actually seemed to enjoy talking about what happened. Larry was convinced the guy would do it again and voted to keep him locked up. But even with that, he was known to be a model prisoner. He earned enough credits for good behavior and for being in prison programs that he was released on November 17th, 2002. So he served just over 20 years of his 30-year sentence. Sucks. He was 61 years old and walked out with no supervision, which is just so wild. While he was in prison, Leslie was out here in these streets building an incredible life. After going through something that would destroy most people, she went on to graduate from Louisiana State University in 1988. Then she decided to go to law school, and in 1991, she graduated from the University of Memphis School of Law. She was admitted to the Tennessee bar in 1991. Today, Leslie Gattas Coleman is a top-rated, super respected attorney in Memphis. She has her own successful law firm, Leslie Gattas and Associates. In addition to her law practice, she has served on the Board of Commission on Missing and Exploited Children. So think about that. Her trauma was all about her family being torn apart and her home being invaded and her being taken. And she chose to spend her career in law helping people when they're at their most vulnerable. It's like the ultimate way of taking her power back. When you look back on all of this, it's just wild, right? An unlocked window is such a simple thing, but it's a huge reminder of how fragile our safety really is. Who the hell could be watching us and targeting us? We don't know. It's so easy to forget to keep your home secure. And I remember growing up, my dad was super paranoid about doors being locked and gates being closed. And that probably stems from him being a lawyer too and seeing the worst things, that can happen to people. So I grew up is the door locked? Is the gate closed? And I'm still like that today. But obviously Leslie was being targeted and that's a separate issue. But the bigger lesson, I think, came from inside that church. The story of the notes being thrown away and the hesitation to call the police just shows how important it is to just trust your gut. When something feels off, even if it's just missing food or a weird note in a Bible, you have to speak up, like Sam Drash did. This crime really changed Memphis at the time. It ruined that feeling of safety in the burbs and made Leslie Gattas a name that every parent and child knew. But at the end of the day, the real takeaway from this story isn't about fear and, being paranoid about locking up your doors and things like that, because anything can happen, right? It's about resilience from so many different people. It's about that 15-year-old girl who was smart enough to use the small time she was set free from that addict to bring attention to her kidnapping in the most silent way possible. Eat too much food, mess people's things up. It's so smart. Would I have thought of that? I don't know. The notes though, come on. To me, it's kind of crazy that in these notes, Leslie is writing her full name. saying it's not a joke, call the police, etc. And when someone finally believed her, when the police actually came, they couldn't find her. Apparently, when that happened, when the police actually came, Ernest was holding Leslie behind the wall. He was covering her mouth with his hand. And, you know, she knew the police was right there. She knew there was a bunch of people right there. She could have yelled, mumbled something. But what if that ended up with her life being at stake right then and there, you know? So it's really smart that she thought of her own way to bring attention to herself. Leslie Gattas, at just 15 years old, was a woman who refused to let 119 days in an attic define her entire life. She survived, she healed, and she built this amazing life of purpose, becoming a leader in the same city that was once frozen with fear for her. Her story isn't just about a kidnapping, it's about how incredibly strong people can be. What part of this story blows your mind the most? Is it the notes? Is it the fact that they were in the attic for 4 months and no one knew? Or is it the fact that this guy had 4,000 girls as a target? Like that, I think that to me is like, what? That's wild. He must have really had some big plans. And really, Leslie saved possibly so many girls. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments, guys. I hope you enjoyed today's video. It's a happy ending. And if you haven't subscribed, what are you doing? Click it. Like the video. Do it. No, I'm just kidding. I'll see you in next week's video, guys. Besitos. Mwah. Bye.